Sacha Stone is an activist, public speaker, publisher, writer, and filmmaker. And since 1999, when he established his nonprofit organization, Humanidad, he's been at the cutting edge of bringing together humanitarian issues and trying to assist with the public becoming up to speed with some of the advanced technologies that have been secretly developed and reverse engineered in various projects. And when he was working with Humanidad, he was asked to assist the United Nations in getting up to speed with some of the advanced technologies that are spoken about and described in ancient texts. And he's with us here today on Exopolitics Today to bridge these different fields of exoarchaeology and some of the power structures that are responsible for the Earth's situation today.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Well, welcome, Sacha, to Exopolitics Today.
Well, Dr. Salla, very, very happy to join you on your platform. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, I know you've got a very interesting history, fascinating history. So I know you were born and raised in Rhodesia, and then at some point you decided to become a rock musician and artist. And so, yeah, how did that progress? And what made you decide in 1999 that you wanted to leave the music industry and start up a humanitarian organization?
The rock and roll thing for me was really a primal scream, growing up in a bush war in Africa for the first 17 years of my life, and then becoming effectively a refugee and sort of repatriated to United Kingdom, where I was given leave to live and remain, but I couldn't work and I couldn't it didn't give me a passport. So I was a refugee effectively and trapped by that. And I got into rock and roll as a kind of sort of primal scream, the late adolescence into my mid-20s. And then by the end of my 20s, I just reached a point where I got that scream out, but wanted to start looking at remedy. As we do, we look at our childhood and we go, well, that was really screwed up. And I want a better world than that. And so my sense of rage had been quelled into more of a philosophical stance. And so I set up Humanidad Foundation because I had access at that point, at the end of my little shock poet rock and roll years. I had a limited celebrity and access to royal houses and Dalai Lama and Nelson Mandela and different sort of icons at that time. And so I exercised that access to begin my own journey into trying to remedy the world. And of course, much of it was folly. And that led me ultimately to being educated by a number of world leaders who took me aside after 5 or 6 years of my diplomatic work and said, you're wasting your time, son. That peace thing that you're on about is not, and unity consciousness is not factored into the business model, And so I had to really change my focus and start looking into the basement, so to speak. And I began very deep dive into what makes the world tick. Why are we subjected to endless cycles of blood economy, war, disease, and poverty? And why was the world that I grew up in sub-Saharan Africa so fucked up? I wanted to get the answers to those questions. And that eventually led me to being continuing in my work in kind of citizen diplomacy and seeding relations with cultures and faiths and I guess governments around the world, became a trusted go-to in some cases by elements within government that asked my foundation Humanidad to get on board with certain weird projects, spooky projects, which is really what led me to Exopolitics. And for many years I've been meeting with the Stephen Greers and the Stephen Bassett's and the Lloyd Pies of this world, and a lot of great scientists who are on the edge. So I was putting together brain trusts of advanced scientists and thinkers and innovators and pioneers. And my foundation became a trusted agent in that sense by certain more conscious powers. And so we were asked on a couple of occasions to troubleshoot alien technologies, and even in one instance in particular, alien hybrids living amongst us. And so I was pulled into that strange basement that you are really the chief icon in the disclosure of, but it's not my wheelhouse. I was more interested in the regenerative economics and finding out solutions, technological solutions. And eventually I was petitioned by elements within the United Nations who asked me to come in and help sex up the UN. This is back in 2009. And I fell victim to that eventually after refusing, because I despise the United Nations. I despise the entire global apparatus. But I was convinced momentarily that sufficient good people trapped within that system needed and wanted good NGOs like mine to come in and help troubleshoot in their basement. So I fell for that line and assumed a role as the Director General for Intergovernmental Renewable Energy. So I'll correct you on that. The UN did not pull me in on archaeocosmology. They pulled me in on Millennium Development Goals relating to sustainability and regenerative economics. And that led to me taking on the mantle for sustainable renewable energies and breakthrough technologies. That was my focus there. But I recognized within 2 years that the Chinese were buying out the basement of the UN, and I called it out in 2009, 2010, 13 years ago, long before Trump or anyone else were grandstanding and talking about China and the Chinese threat. But I remind the world that we created Maoism in China. We installed that deviant software. Wall Street financed the fall of the Romanov dynasty, the Bolshevik revolution, and the installation of communism in Russia, which they're now demonizing, and Maoism, communism, cultural Marxism in China is the utility of the British Crown, the Vatican, and the Anglo-American Compact, Wall Street. So let's just always keep our sights on the fact that the calamities that we point at today are really the devise of our own governments.
Well, I know in 2010, the United Nations did something extraordinary. It invited the cast and the scriptwriters of the Battlestar Galactica series to give a presentation on how to solve, how they kind of approached this kind of intergalactic conflict and how that could be applied to international conflict. And so that was remarkable, because the UN had never done anything like that before. And that kind of stood out. So were you in any way involved with that?
Well, it's so interesting you say that, because I was probably part responsible in as much as I paved the way for Dr. Brian O'Leary, who was a beloved friend of mine, the erstwhile Apollo a scientist, astronaut, mission leader, who was intended to lead the mission to Mars, if you remember, before Congress reneged or bailed on allocating the budget for that mission. But Brian O'Leary was a beloved friend and very involved in, I guess, not so much exopolitics as he was trying to disclose the truth of the secret space program and the fact that things were not quite what they seemed in the shadow government and the shadow NASA basement. So he was vying for disclosure. I helped him and got him into the United Nations to speak to relevant parties there. And at the same time, I was also encouraging conversations between the Bishop of Jerusalem and Edgar Mitchell and Stephen Bassett and others who are and were involved in the fringes of the exopolitic movement. So, and that was 2010. So I guess I was in some way also responsible for that emergence in the political arena.
Yeah, that was very interesting. Because I actually did some research into the Battlestar Galactica series in terms of its creator Glenn Larson actually working with Leslie Stevens IV, who was the son of a Navy admiral and was read in to the Navy's secret space program. And so, and he wrote the pilot episode for Battlestar Galactica originally. So it kind of like, I think it was a soft disclosure that not only are there these human extraterrestrials out there, but also these kind of artificial synthetic life forms that are involved in this kind of like battle between organics and synthetics throughout the galaxy. And that seems to be a constant even now. So yeah, do you want to kind of like speak to that? Because people are thinking about AI and the danger, but is it something that also applies to this kind of extraterrestrial phenomenon, and how do we deal with that?
A great question, a bit broad in context, but I would say that what's emerging now in the gestalt or in the zeitgeist is the fact that we are having to take a reckoning with the fabric of so-called reality as a genus, as a species, as a civilization, as a planetary culture. We're having to put away religious dogma. We're having to put away political and social ideologies and socioeconomic sensibilities. We're having to look at far more profound and impactful aspects to creation and to reality. And that's always a standoff in this dualistic universe between the organic and the fictitious. So the curiosity that we're faced with as a conundrum, as a dilemma, is what is real and what is not real? What is born of God and what is born of the false light? It's a confounding dilemma that's facing humanity. And because human beings emphasize the angelic aspect of the human, we are all galactic hybrids, to be sure, and we carry a multiplicity of galactic or cosmic genetic expressions within each of us. Some of us more emphatic with Syrian or Venusian or Andromedan gene expression, the Africans, for instance, or the mantis element in the Southeast Asian and the Asian genome. So there is a fantastic tapestry of cosmic and genetic gene expressions going on. But all of it ultimately compounds into the human. And it is the angelic aspect of the human that is prevailing. That is the emergence of the pulse of humanity, the common pulse of humanity, which is the Christed mantle, the second coming, so to speak. That's the thing that's emerging here. And it is forcing upon us a reckoning at the individual and the collective level. This is a very beautiful and profound and epochal time for that reason. But what it's doing, as you know, human beings are quantum capacitors of limitless creative force and prana or kundalini or life force, universal force. And what we do is we think things into manifestation. So we I put ideas into the field, and then we put attention on those ideas, and that's what manufactures or manifests reality. And we're now awakening to the somewhat sorry fact that we have collectively been subjugated to the let's say lower elemental, lower astral, extraterrestrial forces to some great extent. There has been a battle between angelic and demonic elements, so to speak. That's just playing out in the theater of our ideas. And so we project those ideas into the field, and what we get back is this fictitious reality born of the Vatican complex, governments, and black and white dialectic of Republicans and Democrats and he's and she's and all the nonsense that the binary dualistic human mind gets enchanted into. The invitation, the real invitation, Michael, to my mind, is the point of transcendence, that we're being invited actually to now supersede or to transmute and transcend that binary logic and step into our, again, I use the term our Christed mantle, to assume that mantle and stop playing binary dialectics, start to recognize that we're all sons and daughters of God, that we are all creators in that sense. So for me, everything that is playing out, the fictitious versus the organic, the artificial, the artificialization of our sentient organic reality is a natural kind of end game apocalyptic or Armageddonist scenario, that the invisible mastery behind the lower elemental aspect of humanity is seeking to artificialize our field of reality, because arguably this is the very last time, because it is the end of time, that these lower elemental forces or demonic forces are able to, or lower frequency, lower vibrational forces are able to sustain their own traction on this earthly temporal plane. Why? Because this plane of existence, Tara, Gaia, Earth, is born of the angelic. It is a covenant between the living sons and daughters of God on the surface of the earth and the Atman, the Godhead, the living God, the living gospel. It is up to us how we choose to steer reality from here. And that's the great reckoning, where each of us having to grow up very quickly and to transmute and transcend binary logic and duality. So I see the artificialization, or the attempt at AI transhumanism, and all of the calamity that that represents. And even I'd go so far as to say the...
Well, Sacha Stone goes on to say some incredible things, but unfortunately, why we can't show you that on YouTube because it would get us censored. So what I recommend is that you just head over to Rumble and watch the rest of this incredible interview with Sacha Stone.